My parents called me a burden while I was dying. They didn't know I had been funding their life for years, Emily Carter. I am 34 years old. 2 months ago, I was bleeding internally in the back of an ambulance on Route 93, somewhere between Quincy and downtown Boston, and I was terrified. Not just because a surgeon was about to open my abdomen, I was terrified because my 4-year-old son Noah was alone at my apartment with a babysitter who had to leave by 7. It was Tuesday, 6:42 p.m. I had 20 minutes before she walked out that door, so I called the one number I had memorized since I was 6 years old. My mother answered on the second ring. I told her what happened. I told her I needed anyone to go stay with Noah until I was out of surgery. There was a pause. Then she said, and I will never forget these words for as long as I live. You have always been a nuisance and a burden. Emily, we have Taylor Swift tickets with Vanessa tonight. Figure it out yourself. The line went dead. What she didn't know, what neither of my parents knew, was that for the past 6 years, I had been the reason they had a house to come home to. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely resonates with you. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. I was 9 years old the first time I understood that I was invisible. My school had a regional science fair, the real kind. The kind where kids from 12 different districts compete, and the winners get their names printed in the South Shore Gazette. I had spent 3 weeks building a working water filtration system out of materials from the dollar store. Sand, gravel, activated charcoal, a 2-liter bottle. I tested it on muddy pond water and got results clean enough to register on a commercial test strip. I won second place overall. Second place, out of 240 entries, for a 9-year-old. I stood at the podium in the school gymnasium, holding a blue ribbon and a certificate with my name printed in gold ink, Emily Marie Carter. I scanned the bleachers. My parents weren't there. My teacher, Mrs. Brannigan, drove me home at 9 p.m. She didn't say much. She just kept her eyes on the road and let me hold my ribbon in my lap. When I walked in the front door, my father was watching a football game, and my mother was on the phone in the kitchen. My sister Vanessa, who was 7, was asleep on the couch, covered with the good blanket, the soft one, the cream-colored one that I was never allowed to use. My mother covered the receiver with one hand and said, "We are sorry, honey. Vanessa had a stomachache." My father didn't look up from the game. I went to my room and put the ribbon in my desk drawer. I still have it. It is in a shoebox on the top shelf of my closet right now, next to Noah's hospital bracelet from the day he was born. That is where a lot of things went. Over the years, into a drawer, into a box, into the part of me that learned to stop expecting. When I was 17, I got into the nursing program at Boston College. Not a safety school, not community college, BC, with a partial academic scholarship, and a letter from the Dean of Admissions that said my application had been among the strongest they reviewed that cycle. I brought the letter home on a Thursday afternoon. My mother was making dinner. My father was in the garage. I laid the letter on the kitchen counter and waited. My mother read it, nodded, and said, "That is wonderful, honey, but we cannot help with the rest of the tuition. Vanessa is starting at Emerson in the fall. Her program costs more than we expected." I said, "I got a scholarship." She said, "There is still the gap." And then she went back to stirring the pasta. My father said it more plainly. A few days later, when I asked him directly about financial help, he looked at me from across the dinner table, the same one where we had had birthday dinners, Christmas mornings, every holiday I could remember, and he said, "Your future is your responsibility. We are stretched right now. That is just how it is." Vanessa got a brand new Volkswagen Jetta for graduation, white, with seat warmers. I took out $47,000 in student loans and worked 22 hours a week at a diner on Commonwealth Avenue. I was on my feet from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., 5 days a week, then in class until 6, then studying until midnight. I graduated with a 387 GPA and a debt load that would take me a decade to pay down. No one came to my graduation either. My father had a golf tournament, not a professional one, just a club thing, and my mother said Vanessa wasn't feeling well. I walked across the stage alone, shook the dean's hand, and took the subway home to my studio apartment. And here is the part that took me the longest to understand. I didn't hate them for it. Not yet. What I did instead was something more complicated and more damaging. I decided that if I just worked harder, gave more, proved myself more clearly, eventually they would see me. Eventually they would understand what they had. I was 24 and freshly employed at Boston Children's Hospital as a pediatric ICU nurse when my parents' financial situation started to fall apart. My father had been working in commercial real estate for 30 years. When the market shifted in 2018, his income dropped sharply, and then again the following year. My mother had never worked full-time. She had had a part-time bookkeeping job she left when Vanessa was born and never went back to it. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. Their house, a 4-bedroom colonial in Canton, Massachusetts, assessed at $680,000, was in danger of going into pre-foreclosure. My father called me on a Saturday morning. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't say hello. Not really, he said. We are in trouble. Emily, we need help. I said I would help. I want you to understand something about that moment. I knew what I was doing. I was not naive. I was 24 years old with student loan debt and a salary of $62,000. And I said yes, I will help you, because I thought, this is how I finally matter. This is how I finally become real to them. That is the saddest thing I have ever admitted out loud. I set up an automatic bank transfer that first week, $2,300 a month, directly to their mortgage servicer, Citizens Bank, account number on file. I covered their homeowner's insurance, $140 a month through Amica. I added them to my cell phone plan. Within a year, I was also covering their car insurance. Jobay Mayuan a year combined for a T Ford Explorer and a Audi that my mother drove. Vanessa's name was on the Audi as a co-owner. I kept a spreadsheet. I am a nurse. I track things. Column A, date. Column B, payee. Column C, amount. Column D, what it was for. I never showed it to them. I never asked them to acknowledge it. I just paid. Month after month, year after year, and they went to Taylor Swift concerts. Let me be specific, because specificity matters. From January 2018 through September 2024, 6 years and 9 months, I made the following payments on behalf of my parents. Mortgage, $2,300 per month, every month, without a single missed payment. That alone totals $186,300. Utilities. I added their electric and gas accounts to an automatic bill pay service I set up in 2020, when my father said the notices were piling up. Average $340 per month. That is $17,340 over the remaining 4 years. Auto insurance, $75 per month. $4,500 over the period. Cell phones, $120 per month. Family plan, $7,680. Health insurance gap. My father had a gap in coverage in 2021 after losing his group plan. 8 months. I paid his COBRA premiums directly. $892 per month. That is $7,136. I hired a cleaning service for their house starting in 2022. When my mother said her back was bothering her. $180 per month. $4,320 over 2 years. I kept a spreadsheet the way nurses do when we are tracking meds or vitals. It wasn't perfect. I missed logging 2 months in 2020, when Noah was a newborn and I was running on 4 hours of sleep. I had to go back through bank statements and piece it together afterward. But even with the gaps, the number that stared back at me was just over $225,000. $225,000 that came out of my paycheck, my tax refund, my overtime shifts, my son's future, a 529 account I had opened for Noah the week he was born and kept quietly raiding every time their car insurance came due. Or my father's COBRA bill arrived. I told myself I would put it back. I didn't, not all of it. That is what I paid. In transfers traceable back to my bank account. Over 6 years, to support two people who told me I was a burden while I was being loaded into an ambulance. And here is the part that haunts me most. The part that isn't in the spreadsheet. I paid for all of this while paying down my own student loans, while saving for Noah's future, while working 12-hour shifts in a pediatric ICU, where I held the hands of parents whose children were dying, and then drove home alone to an apartment that had a water stain on the ceiling I couldn't afford to fix. My colleague and closest friend, Diane. She is a nurse practitioner. She has been with BCH for 11 years. She used to watch me check my phone during lunch breaks, and she finally asked me about it one day. "Emily," she said, "who are you always sending money to?" I told her. It was complicated. Complicated, she said. Or one-sided. I didn't have an answer for that. Not an honest one. The worst part, though the part that kept me up at night, was this. I was raising Noah to watch me disappear. He was 4 years old, and he had already learned to get quiet when Grandma called. He had already learned that certain names change the air in the room. Children absorb everything. They absorb what we model, and I was modeling something I would have broken my heart to see him repeat. That was the stake that mattered most to me. Not the money. Not my reputation. Not even my own dignity, though I want that back too. It was the version of love I was teaching my son. The night of the accident, after the surgery, in recovery, when the anesthesia was wearing off and the pain was real and specific, and I could hear the monitors beeping, I made a decision. A quiet one, the most important kind. I opened my banking app. My hands were shaking from the morphine. It took me 3 tries to navigate to the transfer section. I canceled every automatic payment. All of them, one by one. $2,300, $340, $75, $120, $180. Gone. I didn't call them to tell them. I didn't send a message. I just stopped. Then I put my phone on the nightstand, closed my eyes, and for the first time in 6 years, I slept without dreaming. I need to back up just slightly and tell you about the accident itself. Because what happened in those first moments matters. It was a Tuesday evening in early September. I had just come off a 12-hour shift at Boston Children's Hospital. I was on the Southeast Expressway heading south, in a gray 2021 Honda Accord. Noah was home with Maya, our regular babysitter, a BC education student who charged $18 an hour and was genuinely one of the best things in our lives. Maya had to leave at 7 p.m. for a study group. It was 6:19 when I got on the highway. A pickup truck, a 2020 Ram 1500. I know because it came out in the police report, drifted across 2 lanes without signaling and clipped my rear quarter panel. I spun. I hit the guardrail on the right side of the highway, and then the concrete median divider on the left. Both airbags deployed. I remember the sound. I remember the powder from the airbags. I remember not being able to breathe. The first responders were there in 4 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock. I was watching the clock because of Noah. In the ambulance, the paramedic, a young guy, early 30s, named according to his badge, T. Reyes, told me there was internal bleeding. Likely splenic laceration. I would need imaging and possibly surgery. "Is there someone we should call?" he asked. I gave him my parents' number first. "That is a reflex I will spend a long time unlearning," he dialed. They picked up. He told them their daughter had been in an accident and was being transported to Tufts Medical Center. There was a pause. Then my mother asked to speak to me. He handed me the phone. She said, "How bad is it?" "Really," I said. "They think I need surgery. I need someone to stay with Noah. Maya has to leave at 7. Another pause. And then she said, my mother said to me, in the back of an ambulance, she said, "You have always been a nuisance and a burden, Emily. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Vanessa tonight. Figure it out yourself." I heard Vanessa laugh in the background. She said something about an outfit. The paramedic, T. Reyes, took the phone back. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me for a moment, and then looked back at his equipment. I said, "I am fine. I will handle it," he said. "I know you will." That small thing, a stranger's quiet acknowledgement, I held on to that for weeks afterward. I called a backup emergency nanny service, one I already had saved in my phone. "In pediatric care? You learn early that emergencies don't schedule themselves. I had registered with the service the month I came back from maternity leave. The rate for a Tuesday evening, less than 90 minutes notice, was $68 an hour with a 4-hour minimum. I paid it. I would have paid 10 times that. I called Maya and told her someone was on the way. I texted Noah, a voice message, a silly one. A voice I do where I sound like a robot, who is very bad at being a robot, so that when he woke up and I wasn't home, he would have something from me. Then, I was in the ER. Dr. Cho, Megan Cho, trauma surgery, 12 years at Tufts, confirmed the splenic laceration. The bleeding was manageable, but required intervention. I was in surgery for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it was there between the call from my mother and the moment the anesthesia took hold that something in me changed quietly. The way important things often change, not all at once, but like a door that has been loose on its hinge for years, finally swinging clear off the frame. I want to be precise about this because people sometimes think that moments of clarity are dramatic. They are not. They are very small. They are the moment you stop arguing with a fact you have known for a long time. The fact I had known for a long time was this. I had been paying to be invisible. I had been sending $2,300 a month to a family that had not once, in 34 years looked at me the way I needed to be seen. The money could stop. That was a choice I could make. And for the first time, I understood that making it would not make me a bad daughter. It would make me a free one. I opened my banking app in the recovery room, and I canceled everything. Then I slept. The week I came home from the hospital, I called my Aunt Linda. Actually, that is not quite right. The first call I made when I got home, the day Diane brought me back from Tufts in her car, was to Linda. I was still in my hospital bracelet. I was crying so hard she could barely understand me. She stayed on the phone for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I still have the call record, and she didn't try to fix anything or advise me or tell me what to do. She just stayed on the line until I could breathe normally again. That is who Linda is. She is 61, lives in Medford, Massachusetts, teaches high school English, drives a 12-year-old Subaru Outback, and is one of the most clear-eyed people I have ever known. She was never close with my parents. There was a falling out years ago over something to do with my grandmother's estate. But she and I had kept up our own relationship, quietly, mostly through phone calls, and the occasional lunch at a Thai place we both like in Davis Square. Years ago, not long after I started helping my parents financially, I mentioned it to Linda. Just in passing. I told her I was contributing to their mortgage, helping with some bills. She had gone very quiet. Then she said, "Emily, keep records. Keep every transfer, every receipt, every bank statement. Keep a spreadsheet. One day you may need to show someone exactly what you have been doing." I had done exactly that. What my parents did not know, what they had never bothered to find out, was that I had 6 years of meticulous documentation. A spreadsheet broken down by year, month, category, and payee. Bank records with timestamps, automated transfer confirmation emails, saved in a folder I labeled, very practically, in case. They had never asked me how I managed financially. They had never asked whether keeping up their mortgage was a strain for me. They never wondered, apparently, whether I had records. They assumed, I think, what people often assume about someone who gives quietly and consistently, that the giving is natural, effortless, and unconditional, that there is no bottom to it. What Aunt Linda had understood, and what I was only now beginning to understand myself, was that documentation isn't about revenge. It is about reality. It is about being able to say, with evidence and without apology, this is what happened. This is what is true. The spreadsheet existed. The bank records existed. And in approximately 6 weeks, both of those things would matter more than I could have predicted when I made that first transfer in January of 2018. I just didn't know yet that Vanessa was getting engaged. I was out of the hospital on day 4. I went home in a rideshare because I still wasn't cleared to drive. Noah was there with the emergency nanny, a calm, practical woman named Greta, mid-40s, who had put him to bed at 8 and left me a note on the kitchen counter with his dinner, his bath time, what show he had watched, and a hand-drawn smiley face at the bottom. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time that night, with a cup of tea I didn't drink. I had made a decision. Now I had to figure out what it looked like going forward. On day 6, I called Diane at work. "I need to talk through something," I said. She came over that evening with takeout from the Thai place, and we sat at my kitchen table while Noah slept down the hall. I told her everything. Not just the accident, not just the phone call, everything. The 6 years, the spreadsheet, the $227,000. All of it. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Emily, do they know about the money?" "They know I helped them," I said. "They don't know the total," she said. "Do they know you have stopped?" "Not yet." She looked at me steadily. "How long before they notice?" "The mortgage payment is due on the 15th, I said. "It is currently the 9th. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Here is what I think. You need to talk to someone, a lawyer, even just a consult, about what happens if they try to claim you owe them something or make this ugly. And you need to make sure your documentation is solid." I already had the spreadsheet. I had 6 years of bank statements saved in PDF format. I had the automated transfer confirmation emails. I had everything. I called a family law attorney in Brookline the next morning, a woman named Margaret Solis, who had been recommended to me by a colleague whose own family situation had become legally complicated a few years prior. Margaret confirmed what I already suspected. I had no legal obligation to continue. The payments had been voluntary. The documentation I had was, in her words, unusually thorough for a non-legal context. She also helped me draft a cease contact notice, a formal letter that could be sent if my parents escalated to harassment. I changed my phone number. I gave the new one to Diane, to Noah's school, to the hospital, to Aunt Linda, and to the nanny service. I did not give it to my parents. I locked my credit file with all 3 bureaus. I changed the emergency contact on my hospital employee file from my mother to Diane. And then I waited. The 15th came. The transfer did not go. On the 16th, my mother called my old number 12 times. My father called 4 times. Vanessa sent a text that I saw only because I still had a read receipt set up. "Mom says you changed your number. What is going on? This is really immature." I read it. I did not respond. On the 17th, my father drove to my apartment. I know this because I have a Ring doorbell camera that I installed after a package theft in 2022. I reviewed the footage later that night. A man matching his description rang my buzzer repeatedly for about 9 minutes, then sat in a silver Ford Explorer in the parking lot for almost an hour before driving away. I wasn't home. Noah and I were at the Children's Museum. We had a very nice afternoon. Noah went through the construction zone exhibit 3 times. I had a coffee and sat on a bench and watched him play. I did not feel guilty. I want to be honest about that. I had prepared myself to feel guilty, had almost expected it, had even rehearsed what I would say to myself when it arrived. It didn't arrive. What I felt, sitting on that bench watching my son move a wooden beam from one side of a play structure to the other, with complete and focused delight, was something I had almost forgotten was an option. I felt light. 3 weeks after the accident, I got a call from Aunt Linda. "Vanessa is getting engaged," she said. "Your parents are hosting an engagement dinner at Seasons 52 in Chestnut Hill. The last Saturday of October. There will be around 40 guests." She paused. "I think you should come, Emily." I thought about that for a long moment. "Will you be there?" I asked. "I will," she said. "And I think you should bring your paperwork." I asked how she knew about the dinner. "Your father called and asked me to, and I am quoting, 'Get Emily to calm down before she does something irreversible.'" A long silence on both ends. "Are you going to?" I asked. "I am going to watch you walk into that room and tell the truth," she said. "That is what I am going to do." The dinner was on a Saturday, the 26th of October, 7 p.m. at Seasons 52 in Chestnut Hill, an upscale chain restaurant known for its seasonal menu and its large private dining rooms. My parents had booked the Harvest Room, which seats 48. I arrived at 7:12, on purpose. Late enough that the room was already full and settled. Early enough that the dinner hadn't started. I was wearing a dark green wrap dress. My hair was down. I had a manila folder in my bag. There were 43 people in that room when I walked in. I counted them later. At the time, I just saw faces, family friends, distant relatives. Vanessa's future in-laws, the Marchettis, from Wellesley who I had never met. Vanessa's fiancé, a pleasant-looking man named Drew, who seemed genuinely confused by the shift in energy when I walked through the door. My parents saw me from across the room. My mother's expression went through 3 stages in under 2 seconds. Surprise, then calculation, then something that was trying very hard to look like warmth. My father just watched me. I went to Aunt Linda first. She was standing near the bar with a glass of sparkling water. She squeezed my hand once. Hard. "You okay?" she said. "I am good," I said. And I meant it. The evening proceeded normally for about 40 minutes. There was a past appetizer, little bruschetta things. Very nice, and drinks. And the low hum of a room full of people who know each other in comfortable ways. I was seated at a table near the back with Linda and 2 of my mother's cousins from Providence. Women I recognized but didn't know well. They were kind to me. They asked about Noah. I told them he was home with Diane, and that he had just learned to ride a balance bike and was absolutely certain he deserved a trophy for it. I was almost relaxed. Then my father stood up. He tapped his water glass with a knife, that familiar sound, the one that means everyone needs to listen now, and he smiled out at the room with the easy confidence of a man who had never once questioned whether a room was his to command. He spoke about Vanessa for a few minutes. Her creativity, her beauty, her warmth, her talent. Vanessa had a small fashion consulting business, mostly Instagram adjacent, and my father described it as though she had single-handedly reinvented American retail. He said that raising Vanessa had been the greatest privilege of his life. He said that she was proof that when you invest in someone, that investment comes back to you. He raised his glass. The room raised theirs. I did not raise mine. And then, because my father has never known when to stop, he said, "Of course, we couldn't have been here for Vanessa the way we were without a lot of sacrifice. Raising 2 daughters hasn't always been easy. There were members of this family who didn't always make things simple." He said it lightly, almost as a joke, and several people laughed in a polite, uncertain way. But everyone in my immediate orbit knew what he meant. My mother looked at her hands. Vanessa looked at me with something between guilt and defiance. The room felt it. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't shake. I had thought about this moment for 3 weeks, and I knew exactly what I was going to do and how I was going to sound. I said, "I would like to say something. If that is all right." The room went quiet. I said, "My name is Emily Carter. I am Vanessa's sister, and I want to clarify something my father just said about sacrifice, because I think this family deserves accuracy." I took the folder out of my bag. I said, "For the past 6 years, I have been covering my parents' mortgage, $2,300 per month, through an automatic transfer to Citizens Bank. I have also covered their utilities, their car insurance, their health insurance, and their cell phone plan. I kept records." I held up the spreadsheet, printed, double-sided. 12 pages. I had made 3 copies. I set one on the table in front of me. "The total," I said, "is $227,276. I have 6 years of bank statements to document every dollar." The room did not make a sound. My father said, "Emily," I said, "I am not finished." He stopped. I said, 2 months ago, I was in a car accident on Route 93. I was bleeding internally, and I needed someone to watch my 4-year-old son while I went into surgery. I called you." I looked at my mother. "You told me I was a nuisance and a burden. You told me you had Taylor Swift tickets." Someone at a table near the window. I don't know who made a sound. Not a laugh. Something closer to a sharp inhale. I said, "I stopped the transfers that night. From my hospital bed. And I want you to know that I don't regret it. And I am not here to make a scene. I am here because I was excluded from this family for 30 years. And I am done letting that happen quietly." Aunt Linda stood up. She said, "I want to confirm what Emily has described. I have known about the transfers for years. I encouraged her to keep documentation. What she has been doing for this family, and what this family said to her in an ambulance, is something every person in this room should know." Drew, Vanessa's fiancé, said quietly to Vanessa, Is this true? Vanessa didn't answer. My mother said, in a voice that had gone very small, Emily, this is not the place I said. I agree. It shouldn't have been anywhere. But here we are. I looked at my father. I said, I wasn't a burden. I was your safety net. And then I picked up my folder, pushed my chair in, kissed Aunt Linda on the cheek, said goodbye to the cousins from Providence, and walked out of that restaurant into the cool October air. I sat in my car for a few minutes. The city sounds came in through the cracked window traffic. A distant siren, someone laughing on the sidewalk. I was entirely calm. I drove home. Diane was on my couch, watching a documentary about deep-sea fish. Noah was asleep with his sneakers still on, which he does when he has had a particularly good day. I took his sneakers off. I sat down next to Diane. She looked at me. I said, It happened. She said, How do you feel? I thought about it, I said, like something heavy just went out to sea. The cease contact notice went out the following Monday morning. Margaret Solis, my attorney, sent it certified mail to my parents' home address and to my father's personal email. It outlined, clearly, and without emotion, that any contact directed at me through calls, texts, email, third-party messengers, showing up at my home or workplace, would be treated as harassment and documented accordingly. My mother called my old number 11 times that Monday, then 3 times on Tuesday. Then, I assume she figured out that no one was picking up. On Wednesday, Vanessa sent a message to Aunt Linda. Linda told me about it, saying that I had ruined the engagement dinner, and that Drew's parents were mortified, and that this was exactly the kind of dramatic thing Emily always does. Aunt Linda replied with a single sentence. Vanessa, your sister has been paying your parents' mortgage for 6 years. Perhaps the mortification is misplaced. Vanessa did not respond. On Thursday, my father sent an email to an address I no longer checked. Linda forwarded it to me. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph said that what I had done was humiliating. The second paragraph said that the family had always tried their best, and that I was choosing to weaponize private information. The third paragraph said that he and my mother were struggling, and that cutting off support without notice had been cruel. I read it once. I did not respond. Margaret noted it in the file. What struck me, reading it, was not the anger. Anger I had expected. What struck me was the complete absence of any acknowledgement that a phone call had been made to me in an ambulance. No mention of the words that were said. No mention of a surgery. No mention that I had been hurt or frightened or alone. Just, you embarrassed us. You hurt us. You were cruel. That told me everything I needed to know about whether anything had changed. On Friday, I went back to work at BCH for the first time since the accident. Dr. Jameson, my unit's attending, had cleared me for modified duty. No lifting over 20 pounds for another 2 weeks. I spent the shift doing charting and patient consults, and a lot of talking with parents in waiting rooms, which is one of the things I am good at. My colleague Terry, a travel nurse from Atlanta who has been on our unit for about 8 months, and has no patience for anything he considers nonsense, asked me how I was doing, and I said I was actually doing quite well. He said, You seem different, I said. I think I am, he said. Good different, or bad different, I said. Good. Definitely good. That night, I made dinner a real one, pasta with a sauce I made from scratch, which I almost never have the bandwidth to do, and Noah sat at the kitchen table and told me about a disagreement he had had at preschool over who got to be the line leader and how he had resolved it by suggesting they take turns. That was really smart, I said. He considered this seriously and said, I know. I laughed for the first time in weeks. That is what I want to tell you, before I go any further. The opposite of carrying too much is not emptiness. I had been afraid, somewhere under everything, that if I put it all down I would feel hollow, that the weight had been structural, that I would collapse without it. I didn't. I felt, instead, like there was room for dinner, room for laughing, room for my son's small, serious voice explaining the merits of a rotating line leader system. There was room for all of it. I want to walk you through what happened over the following months, because I think the aftermath is the part that people gloss over in stories like this. And I think the aftermath is where the real story lives. October into November, the mortgage payment my parents had been counting on had now been missing for 6 weeks. Citizens Bank sent the first formal notice of late payment at 30 days. At 60 days, my parents received a pre-foreclosure warning. I know this, not because I was watching, but because my father, apparently unable to identify anyone else to call, called Aunt Linda. He asked her if she had any way to talk sense into Emily. Linda told him she did not believe I had lost my senses. She told him that if he was facing financial hardship, he might want to contact a housing counselor or HUD. He hung up on her. My parents listed the Canton house with a real estate agent in late November. 4-bedroom colonial, assessed at $680,000, listed at $649,000. I saw it on Zillow because someone sent me the link. I will not pretend I didn't look at it. I did. I looked at the listing photos of rooms I had grown up in, the dining room, with the table where I had been told my future was my responsibility, the kitchen where my mother had nodded and gone back to stirring pasta, and I felt something very quiet. Not sadness. Exactly. Something older than sadness. The house sold in January for $631,000. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Stoughton, which rents for, according to the listing I found, $1,850 a month. They can afford it, or they should be able to if they are careful. The Vanessa thread. Vanessa's engagement continued, though I understand from Linda that the Marchetti family, Drew's parents, had some pointed conversations with Drew after the dinner. Not about calling off the engagement, nothing that dramatic, but about what they were inheriting. In terms of family dynamics, Drew is, by all accounts, a decent person. Linda has met him twice, and says he asks good questions, and actually listens to the answers. Vanessa's fashion consulting work, the Instagram-adjacent business, had been partially funded by my parents, who had been giving her a monthly stipend of $1,200 that I now know came in part from money I had been sending them. When that stipend stopped, so did some of her capacity to take on unpaid brand partnerships and invest in her own content. She had to take a part-time administrative job at a Newbury Street boutique. I have no particular feelings about this. I don't say that in a cold way. I mean genuinely that my emotions about Vanessa are complicated in a way that doesn't resolve neatly into satisfaction or guilt. She was golden-childed as much as I was overlooked, and I don't know entirely what that did to her or who she is underneath it. What I do know is that she has not reached out to me. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even a hostile message. That absence is, I think, its own kind of answer. 3 months out, in January, my father sent a letter handwritten, which I found unexpectedly startling. He has always been a person who types everything. The handwriting was careful, in a way that suggested effort. He said that he had been wrong. He said that he had known, for a long time, that he had not been a fair father to me. He said that the dinner had been a reckoning he hadn't known was coming, and that he had spent several weeks after it in something he described as a kind of fog. He did not mention my mother. He asked if I would be willing to speak with him on the phone. Once, briefly. I sat with that letter for 2 weeks. Then I wrote back by hand. Because he had written by hand, and there was something in that mirroring that felt right. I told him that I was willing to have one phone call. I told him the call would be about his experience and his choices, not about relitigating the dinner or negotiating any kind of resumed financial involvement. I told him that my expectations were low and my boundaries were firm. We spoke on a Thursday in February for 44 minutes. He cried, twice. I did not. I am not saying this to position myself as harder or better. I am saying it because I had already done my crying months of it. Years of it, quiet and private and mostly alone. And by February I had moved past the place where his acknowledgement undid me. It was real, it mattered, and it was not enough to fix everything, because 44 minutes cannot undo 30 years. But it was something. I told him I was glad he called. I told him I was not ready to meet in person. I told him that what he had said to me in the ambulance, or rather, what my mother had said while he said nothing, had done a damage that was going to take time to assess. He said, I know. I said, okay, we said goodbye. I don't know what comes next with him. I genuinely don't. There is a version of the future where we rebuild something small and careful. There is a version where this is as far as it goes. I am holding both possibilities loosely and not forcing either one. My mother has not reached out. Not a letter, not a message through Linda, not anything. I don't know what to make of that either. Maybe she is waiting. Maybe she has nothing she can bring herself to say. Maybe she has simply never fully understood that I am a person separate from her idea of me. What happened that I didn't expect? In late November, I got a call from someone I had almost forgotten. My paternal grandmother's sister, a woman named Ruth, who is 83, and lives in a retirement community in Sarasota, Florida. She had heard about the dinner from someone she wouldn't say who, and she called to tell me something she had apparently been holding for a long time. She told me that my grandmother, my father's mother, who died when I was 11, had loved me very specifically, had talked about me to Ruth in terms that Ruth described as a different quality than how she talked about the others, had said, more than once, that she saw in me someone who would endure and matter. She would have been so proud of you, Ruth said. She would have been proud before the dinner, but she would have understood why you did it. I thanked her. After we hung up, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and cried, not in pain, but in the complicated, releasing way of learning you were seen by someone who is no longer alive to see you. I called her back the next day. We talked for an hour. I am going to visit her in the spring. There's something Ruth said near the end of our first call that I keep returning to. She said, "Your grandmother used to say that the ones who make themselves small are only doing it because no one ever showed them how much space they are allowed to take up." I have been thinking about that ever since. 6 months out where things stand. I am, as of this recording, doing well. Genuinely, I am back to full duty at BCH. I got a positive performance review in March that specifically noted my patient-family communication, which, under the circumstances, I found quietly funny. I have started a small savings account, specifically labeled Noah's Future, that grows each month by exactly the amount I used to send my parents. Noah is 5 now. He recently started reading real reading, sounding out words from picture books with absolute furious concentration, and I cannot describe what it is like to sit next to him on the couch and watch that happen. Diane and I have started a standing monthly dinner, alternating between cooking at her place and at mine. We make things from recipes. Last month, she made me her grandmother's pernil. I made her a lemon tart that took 3 attempts to get right. Aunt Linda and I talk every week. I am, in the quiet and ordinary way that doesn't make good stories, happy. Today, I am sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning. Noah is still asleep. There is coffee in the French press, which I am allowing to steep for exactly 4 minutes, because I read somewhere that is the optimal time, and I have become a person who cares about this. The window is open. It is May. The street outside sounds like a street on a Sunday in May. Unhurried, a little bird song. Someone walking a dog. I am not owed a beautiful morning. No one is. But I have one, and I am not taking it for granted. I want to tell you what I have learned. Not in the preachy, packaged way I am suspicious of stories that tie up too cleanly, but honestly, the way I would tell it to someone I trusted. The first thing, people who make you feel like a burden have usually convinced themselves they are doing you a favor. My parents genuinely believed, I think, that their dismissiveness was realism, that they were preparing me for a world that wouldn't coddle me. What they were actually doing was practicing the art of looking at something valuable and seeing an inconvenience. That is a failure of perception. It was their failure, not my reality. The second thing, money is not love, but how people receive your money tells you a great deal about how they understand love. I gave for 6 years without being asked once how I was managing. That is not oversight. That is a worldview in which I existed primarily as a resource. The moment I became unavailable as a resource, I became, in my father's word, cruel. That sentence tells you everything. The third thing, the hardest one, the one I am still working on, being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who handles things that can become a prison if you let it. I had confused competence with worthiness. I thought that if I was capable enough, useful enough, if I needed nothing, and provided everything, I would eventually earn a place in the family that felt real. I was wrong. You cannot earn your way into being loved by people who have decided not to love you. You can only decide, eventually, to stop spending yourself on the attempt. And the last thing, the one that feels most important right now, sitting at this table with the French press and the birdsong, the people who truly love you don't make you audition for it. I see it every day at work: parents in waiting rooms, parents who have driven through the night, parents who ask questions they are afraid to hear the answers to because they need to know their child is okay. That is love in its functional form. It shows up, it asks, it stays. That is what I want for Noah. Not a mother who handles everything without being asked, but a mother who shows him that love is a choice you make actively, out loud, with your presence, and your honesty, and your willingness to say, "You matter to me. I will show up." I am learning to be that. I think I am getting better at it. If you are watching this, and you have spent years making yourself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be, I want you to know that the space you have been compressed into is not your actual size. You are allowed to take up room. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to walk out of a restaurant in October and sit in your car and feel, for the first time in years, like the air belongs to you. You don't need anyone's permission to belong. Thank you for staying with me through this. If this story resonated, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved in order to start taking care of yourself? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what time it is there. I will be reading. Until next time, take care of yourselves. The good kind of care. The kind that doesn't ask you to disappear.